how the two big questions are: is there enough money in the kitty to build all these things, including the 6 new common combat vessels, and will they be built in time? In other words, if there's a long delay in programming it, production, etc., let's hope there won't be. But if there is, then of course history tells us that the delays in procurement programs are almost as good as red. Then of course there'll be problems, and there'll be increasing problems if there are delays. So
the incoming Prime Minister Andy Burnham is understood to have signed off on Keir Starmer's long-awaited defence investment plan. The package is expected to be worth up to £15 billion, which is more than the offer that led the former Defence Secretary John Healey to quit, but still well short of the £28 billion that military chiefs say they need to fully modernise Britain's armed forces. Keir Starmer is expected to unveil the full plan later this week, and I'm joined now by the Times' former defence editor, Michael Evans. Hello, Mike.
Good morning.
So look, John Healey, as I said, he resigned only a few weeks ago over defence funding. Where do you reckon this extra billion or two has come from now?
Well, it's a fancy bit of mathematical footwork, I guess. I think he's got, the new guy's got between £1 billion and £1.5 billion extra. I mean, there are always ways and means of getting a little bit extra here and there. It was definitely in Starmer's interest before he leaves number 10 to get this defence investment plan out. And therefore he had to, with the Treasury backing him, had to make some sort of better deal for the new Defence Secretary. And that's what he's done. But I mean, it's a lot of money in your eyes and my eyes, but in terms of military spending, an extra billion or so is not a lot, and will not certainly cover the huge gap that many defence chiefs have been warning about for really some years.
I mean, the funding gap that still exists is, what, £13 billion short of what military chiefs wanted. How worried should we be about that? Should we be sort of lying awake at night worrying about that, or is it just going to mean like sort of marginal changes, given the overall numbers are still so huge?
I mean, I think we really have to put this all into context. The trouble is that defence spending is all about money, clearly. And the armed forces chiefs have been quoting this £28 billion gap for a long time, and I think we've all got a bit sort of muddled and confused by it. What matters is not the fact that there's a £28 billion gap, but the fact that we need enough money to do what has to be done, which was laid out in the Defence Review, and that, I think, with any luck, can be funded reasonably without worrying too much about this £28 billion gap. I think we should forget about that and just get on with funding properly this new review and the plans which have now emerged about how that's going to bear fruit for the armed services, particularly, it seems, for the Navy and for the Royal Marines, and hopefully for the other forces as well.
So the big headline here is that we're essentially ditching traditional destroyers in order to bet big on drones. Is that a smart move?
Well, we're not just going for drones. I mean, the drones will be on ships. So the important thing is that we're not going to replace the Type 45 destroyers. We've currently got 6 of those. Only about 2 of them are actually sort of operating at the moment. They were going to be replaced by something called Type 83 destroyers, and that's not going to happen anymore. Incidentally, I think the industry has spent probably just a little bit more than £1 million on the concept design for. So it's not a huge amount of money, but it's £1 million wasted, if you like. So that's not going to happen. And they're going to be replaced by these so-called common combat vessels, which I think actually are a good idea. I mean, it takes on board all the lessons learned from the war in Ukraine and what Russia is building up with drones and all kinds of underwater aerial drones, every sort of drone. And this new common combat vessel will be able to launch all these sort of systems. And I think that's probably a very good move.
Although, I mean, it's got to actually happen, and we gather the UK is now facing a frigate gap, where old warships are being decommissioned before replacements become available. How worrying is that?
I think that's been a worry for such a long time. I mean, we currently have 6 Type 23 frigates, which are really old and are pretty well going out of the system. I mean, they've been good, warships in the past, but they're going to be replaced by, well, they are being replaced by Type 26s and Type 31s, as they're called. So, by the time they are built, we'll have a reasonably good, potent naval force to back up all kinds of operations, including, of course, escorting and protecting our 2 aircraft carriers. They can't just go off into the oceans without having defensive warships escorting them. That's the way it works. So we'll need those. The 2 big questions are: is there enough money in the kitty to build all these things, including the 6 new common combat vessels? And will they be built in time? In other words, if there's a long delay in programming it, production, etc., let's hope there won't be. But if there is, then of course history tells us that delays in procurement programs are almost as good as red. Then of course there'll be problems, and there'll be increasing problems if there are delays. So hopefully, once the money is put against the various programs, they need to get on with it.
Look, we know that while this is all going on, there are Russian submarines lurking around our underseas cables, and there seem to be sort of Russian ships coming through the channel almost with impunity. Is it a military, like a military consideration, or a political consideration that we don't really seem to be dealing with them?
Well, it's both. I mean, I think enough politicians have been warning about the Russian threat. In fact, some of it rather alarmist, that by 2030 we could have a war between Russia and NATO, or NATO members. Whether that includes UK coming under attack, I don't know. I find that rather alarmist. But the fact is, you've got to merge politics with military. They've got to back each other up. And if you're going to make strong statements about we are here to defend our nation, and we'll do so in the future, whatever the threat from Russia, you've got to back it up with military power. And right now, we don't have that. We have an extremely fine and professional armed forces. People who say that the armed forces are now so small that they're of no value is nonsense. We have an extremely good and professional armed forces, but they need a lot of backup. They need money. And they need manpower, and they need extremely good modern ships and modern aircraft and modern everything else. And that costs a lot of money. And this is why so many governments have had problems with trying to match requirements with the money available. And I think whoever becomes the next Prime Minister, presumably Andy Burnham, he will face exactly the same problem, and we'll need to get to grips with it.
Well, I've got you, Mike. Let me ask you briefly about Iran, because after escalating strikes over the last few days, the US and Iran have agreed to halt their attacks and meet in Qatar for talks this week. Why were strikes escalating over the last few days?
It is absolutely down to one thing. I mean, we've almost forgotten about the nuclear issue with Iran. It's all about the Strait of Hormuz. And if you look at the language in the Memorandum of Understanding, it was very vague language. It said vaguely that Iran and Oman would sort of ensure the safe passage of international shipping. So in America's interpretation, that means keep away, don't do anything, and let everything else go through, all the ships go through without any problems. If you're in Iran, in Tehran, you look at it in a different way. You say, aha, this is America saying to us, we can get involved in the safe passage. And to us, safe passage means some sort of fee and some sort of toll. So it's all about that. And all the negotiations that will go on between now and whenever is all going to be about whether Iran manages to get some form of fee involved or toll involved. Trump has said he will not allow it. But clearly that's what Tehran is up to. They will do anything and everything they can to make sure that forever, from now on forever, they will have some sort of administrative management sort of control over the Strait of Hormuz. And right now, they're looking as if they're heading in that direction, because otherwise, I think Trump's going to have to go back to bombing. And of course, he doesn't want to do that. The American people don't want that to happen, and nor does, of course, the whole of NATO. So I think Iran will just push this line for as long as they possibly can until they get some sort of deal which allows them to have control of the Strait of Hormuz.
Michael Evans, former defence editor for The Times, thank you very much indeed.